You know, something completely astonishing happened during the election. It was truly shocking. It was like it was out of a Hollywood movie, and then everyone just sort of forgot about it. I'm talking about the astonishing case of a Liberal candidate who was actually an incumbent MP, Paul Chiang, who said multiple times to journalists that there was $1 million Hong Kong dollar bounty on one of his political rivals, a bounty offered by the Chinese government. And he encouraged any people, Chinese, Canadians, or others, to physically kidnap this political rival of his, Joe Tay is his name, and deliver him to the Chinese consulate to collect the reward. I know it sounds too crazy to believe, but it was all captured on video. Take a look at this.
The other person that's running, most probably is, the Chinese community knows, Joe Tay, Zhang Jing. Right? He's looking for the nomination. The Chinese media knows him. He was in the media business in Hong Kong, and here in Canada, he's a radio host, or I don't know, for Singtel Media or Fairchild, he was a media person. So that's all he did all his life. But also right now, he is wanted by the Chinese government, and there's a $1 million reward on his head. So they want, if you guys want to pick him up and take him to the Chinese consulate, you make him $1 million. I'm just joking, but there is a arrest warrant out for him from the government of China, and there is a reward for him. But apart from that, I can't say more than that.
That reverberated, not just within the Chinese-Canadian community, which is very dense in the neighborhoods of Markham, but in the general meeting too. And Mark Carney was pressed on the subject, and he stood by his man, not the Canadian democracy activist Joe Tay, who was threatened. He stood by the threatener. Take a look at this.
The comments were deeply offensive. Terrible. This is a terrible lapse of judgment by Mr. Chiang. He has apologized for those comments. He has apologized directly now to the person that he mentioned. Apologized directly to him yesterday. I've spoken to Mr. Chiang as well over the course of the weekend to understand his position. He is a veteran policeman. Mr. Chiang is a veteran policeman with more than a quarter century of service to his community. 28 years of defending rights in this community, and he will continue with his candidacy going forward, having made those apologies very clearly to the individual, to the community, and moving forward to serve.
And he stood by him, and he stood by him. And a week went by, and only then did Paul Chiang resign, but not with Mark Carney ever criticizing him. It was just absolutely shocking. And Chiang's successor was the same again, not issuing threats to kidnap anybody, but he was a Chinese-Canadian police officer, which is outstanding. I think it's important that Chinese communities have a police officer who understands them, speaks the language, as long as he's meeting the standards of being a good cop. But incredibly, he acted as if he was representing the Chinese state, not the Canadian state. Here's video of him singing Chinese nationalist songs at a Chinese political event. Absolutely astonishing. All of this just happened. The election came, Mark Carney won, including a dominating majority in the Greater Toronto area. But would you look at this? Absolutely shocking. The headlines I'm going to read now from our friend Sam Cooper at thebureau.news. Let me read this headline and then I'll call on Sam. Breaking. Hong Kong police detain relatives of Canadian candidate targeted by Beijing election interference. Move follows aggressive People's Republic of China disinformation against Joe Tay. RCMP security warnings, and raises pressure on Prime Minister Mark Carney after White House meeting. And Sam Cooper joins us now. Sam, This feels like a five-alarm fire. Although Joe Tay's relatives, I understand, are not Canadian nationals, they are so obviously being arrested as a way to put pressure on him. You have this story, it's outstanding, in the Bureau.news. Let me ask you, has there been a response from the Canadian government, if not from Mark Carney, from the Foreign Affairs Department at all, from Global Affairs Canada?
It's a day after the story, and I reached out to the Prime Minister's office with the full story and asking for a response. There's been absolutely no response from Mr. Carney's office yet. CSIS, Canada's intelligence agency, also received my questions, including were they looking into complaints that Joe Tay's campaign potentially was stalked during the election campaign. That's something that I also reported, Ezra. And CSIS has informed me that they're working on a response. So certainly any new information that I get on this story that I've been chasing, I will update. But deafening silence from Mr. Carney, who, as you rightly point out, has said nothing essentially in nothing to tell China that it's absolutely unacceptable what's happened to Mr. Tay. And as you say, he stood by his candidate right to the end and hasn't acted.
You know, I left out the worst part of the story, Sam, and that's that the RCMP, and you correct me if I'm getting this even one word wrong, that the RCMP cautioned Joe Tay against campaigning in public, that they implied there was some threat against him. And instead of rallying around him, supporting him, protecting him, helping him, they said, don't go out there. It would be like telling, and this has happened in some jurisdictions, telling Jewish people not to go out wearing a yarmulke because you'll be attacked by anti-Semites. Just stay home. Well, no, your job is to protect me. It felt the same, telling Joe Tay, don't go out on the streets of Canada to campaign. You're under threat. Did that actually happen? Am I misremembering? Because that sounds too crazy to be true.
No, Ezra, I reported this based on certain sources close to the campaign. Remember, this is a very sensitive, ongoing story, so certain people can't be identified. But I confirmed with 100% confidence that the day that the site task force came out with that public disclosure saying that broad cyber operations against Joe Tay had been rolled out, on that same day, I was informed that Mr. Tay was advised by RCMP for safety reasons. It would be better for him not to campaign in person on that day at least. And the New York Times followed my reporting with similar reporting within days. So that is the fact. And you're right. I mean, certainly the RCMP have a job to do to keep Mr. Tay safe. But as Canadians, we should be asking, well, would a way to do that to be to give Mr. Tay officers around him so that he could campaign and run a fair campaign in person? And as the New York Times reported, supporting and corroborating my reports, he ran a quiet campaign, and he did very well at that.
Yeah. Wow. You know, this story reminds me, I had the pleasure of meeting a man named Joe Wong, who is with he's Falun Gong, which is a religious sect that the Chinese Communist Party wants to destroy. And he's a journalist in Canada here. And he said that his family member, I forget if it was his brother, was back in China in the hospital. And his brother called on the phone and said that there was secret police there, and handed the phone to the secret police, who threatened him to stop criticizing China. Joe Huang continued doing it. Imagine how terrifying that is. Your own blood, your brother, calls you from the hospital and says, the secret police are here. They have something to say. You would feel violated. You would feel terrified. Well, I'm going to quote from your story again, Sam. The move to detain and question Tay's cousin and the man's wife in Hong Kong, reported by multiple sources, including the Hong Kong Free Press, appears aimed at ramping up pressure on Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney. So they're doing the same. They're going after the family, and that's got to terrify. It's got to terrify the Chinese-Canadian community. And I think that's what a lot of this is. When you have these Chinese-Canadian police officers, and it's revealed that they're taking orders as much from China as they are from the police boss, that's terrifying, because all these people who've come to Canada hoping to be free, they're still got to look over their shoulder. That's my heart goes out to these folks, Sam.
I agree, Ezra. As Joe Tay himself said, when Paul Chien issued an apology saying that he was just joking when he suggested Mr. Tay could be turned over to Chinese officials in Toronto, Joe Tay rightly said, apology not accepted. That message was CCP statecraft from the Liberal MP, and it was not only aimed at Joe Tay, it was aimed broadly at the Chinese Canadian community, saying, do not support democracy. Do not vote for Joe Tay. And look, he was right. Now his relatives under questioning in Hong Kong, again, that message being sent out to the Chinese Canadian community, do not vote for Conservatives because they're harder on China than the Liberals. And look, who benefited from those very same cyber operations, as Site disclosed and the Bureau reported? Prime Minister Mark Carney, who remains silent on this issue. So the damage continues, Ezra.